and policy implications contained in document as mentioned above. And it was also highlighted this morning. Some of the countries were already reporting on the challenges that they are facing in providing affordable housing due to the flux of migration from the conflict and from Ukraine. So I invite Hannah now to make her presentation.
Well, thank you so much. We're trying to organize the chairs here. So. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I mean, we missed half of you are still having lunch, but this will be streamlined and recorded. So what I'm going to do is going to take you through quickly this survey. So what happened is that as of February, we have this refugee crisis, which is one of the most important crises in the 20th century. So we said, let's see what are the cities that are surrounding Ukraine, how are they surviving? Yes, how are they surviving, and what type of strategies they have adopted in order to host the refugees while at the same time make sure that their long-term needs and the needs of their citizens are well met. So what happened, we already did this survey, we focused only on certain cities. The aim was to identify the emerging immediate and long-term needs in the area of housing, real estate management, real estate market, and urban development, areas for further collaboration, what cities want to do in terms of intercity collaboration or with the UNECE or in general. And of course, we want to look into informing intergovernmental discussions. So this was the whole objective in order to highlight the surrounding cities. Of course, we looked, here I'm looking at the scope, we looked only at the neighboring cities with the highest number of Ukrainian refugees in terms of per capita, right, per head. Then we looked into the challenges they face in terms of at the eve of the refugee crisis, because we know that before that there was the COVID. So, okay, how were the cities before the crisis and what were the major concerns before the refugee crisis? And then, of course, you look at the absorption capacity of the cities, how did they absorb, how they manage, then their immediate and long-term needs. This is where we have, in terms of the countries, we looked into the cities that are located in those countries and basically per head of population. So you see in terms of per head of population, the highest is the Republic of Moldova, although in terms of the absolute number, of course, it's more than 2 million is Poland. But the Republic of Moldova is more in terms per head. These are the cities. You could see that around 15 cities, not 13, I forgot to put 2 in the table. So these are the 15 cities from all of the 5 countries. What we did, we had a questionnaire. So there was a questionnaire that focused on basically what were the impact of the COVID, what did they do, what are the different strategies to address the COVID, and then how were they. Then we looked into the immediate needs and long-term needs. I do not want to go into the details. You see how the slides are because you have the cities that will say in more detail. I just want to highlight one point, is the COVID response. It's very interesting that all the cities said that the most important aspect was awareness raising. It saved them a lot of money, misinformation, and a lot of money, a lot of, they reduced the spread of the virus by simply educating their citizens, and some of them had vaccination, they had early vaccination campaign, and all of these things which are provided in the annex. And these things, nobody knew that they did all of this work, and there were lots of laws and legislation as well to increase transparency, support for the vulnerable group, including women, children, orphans, the disabled. They did a lot of programs for these groups. Of course, they also supported local businesses, basically tax exemptions. The bottom line is that they were already strained financially because while the cities got some funds from the central government, still they had to allocate their own budget for COVID response. This is COVID response. Of course, the selected cities' immediate and long-term needs. The major point to say is all the cities said that we have already tried to absorb the refugees in our houses, and they do not have much more houses to host them in. There is that challenge. There is a challenge also when it comes to the winter coming with the rising energy crisis. So what are they going to do in order to make sure that all the refugees are hosted? And some of them, most of the cities had to do like makeshift. So they repurposed some of the big stadiums in order to host the refugees. So now with winter, they're a little bit concerned about that. There is a very interesting thing we always say about rapid urbanization. Before the COVID, some of the cities, they were shrinking cities and the population was declining simply because they were trying to migrate to, these are the smaller cities in town, to migrate to better towns. So in some cities, that was a very good, they were able through the refugees to get more skills, but in others that was not the case. So the city is also different in terms of their capacities to absorb the refugees because some of them were saying we have empty buildings for schools and we were able to host the refugee children and so on. So the issue of the population growth played a critical role in the ability to absorb the refugees. So I'm going to just stop here, and I just wanted to give you the background. Of course, the most important thing, we did a detailed questionnaire, and in the case of Poland, we collaborated with the association and with the union in order to distribute it to the highest possible number of cities. We did it online, we translated it into Polish. The number of cities were not high because it coincided with the summer. Yes, but we're going to do something more about it. So I just wanted to highlight this. The remaining, we did it online, and then some of them sent us their answers. So I'm going to stop here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Hannah, for this insight. Of course, it's a huge work that was presented in few slides, and for sure that there is a lot to find in the report. What struck me is the fact that cities that you have contacted or surveyed have been under the COVID-19 effects and recovery measures, and then they were hit by the refugee crisis, which is doubling their challenges and also making more difficult to address the problems of affordability. But now we will listen from those that are directly dealing with these problems, from Republic of Moldova, from Poland, from Romania, from Greece, and now I give the floor to Mr. Ion Seban, General Mayor of Chișinău, Republic of Moldova. Sorry?
He's going to moderate.
Oh, say, okay, because okay. So we have in the panel, let me introduce them and then, let's see, Chairman. Okay. Ion Seban, General Mayor of Chișinău, Republic of Moldova. Mr. Dionis Ternovski, Deputy Mayor, Ungheni, Republic of Moldova. Mr. Andrei Poravski, Executive Director, Polish Association of Cities. Mr. Tomasz Fiolek, Executive Director, Union of Polish Metropolis. Mr. Horia Tomescu, Deputy Mayor of Bucharest, Romania. Mr. Tassos Kriakukis, Ambassador, Diplomatic Advisor to the Mayor of Athens in Greece. So now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to do now an exercise. Let's say that we have to go back to the reality after the inspirational lecture done by Lord Foster 1 hour ago, talking about future cities, talking about quality architecture, talking about focus on sustainability, energy transition, and subjects that appears to us far from the complexity, the difficulties all these cities are facing. So the challenge is to face in parallel solutions for the emerging needs with immediate response to thousands of refugees and in parallel to the cities that are receiving all these refugees. The second goal is to do all the possible to keep the attention, I will say, the pressure on the more structural plans that cities are running with the focus on, among others, sustainability and climate change, energy transition, and so on. So this is very complex, but we know that resilience and flexibility and ability in managing all these problems together are typical of these countries and cities. And I think on the basis of the result of the report, thank you, Hannah, for the big picture you gave us with the report. So let me give the floor to Jon Seban. We heard that Moldova is one of the countries with the heaviest impact of refugees in terms of percentage per population. So please, Seban, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Your Excellency, dear guests, dear colleagues. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Chisinau City Hall and all our inhabitants, and to thank for this kind of opportunity, if I may see the presentation. Okay. Well, so when it comes to Chisinau, the capital city of Republic of Moldova, and the country that is bordered to Ukraine, especially in those really affected regions like Odessa, because we are 170 kilometers from Odessa, then Nikolaev, Kherson, and many other cities. So the first refugee that crossed the border with Republic of Moldova at Palanka, this is in the south of our country, it's near to Odessa, it's like 47 kilometers to Odessa, was accommodated by Chisinau hub. So we had a big center. It used to be before 2 months we arranged it for refugees. And it was like closed but conserved. Triage center for COVID. That's why in a sense for us it was really easy to change the protocols. Nobody in that region had such an experience, and hope never will have in any region of Europe and the world. But as I said, so the first one passed through the border. The first one was accommodated by our Mod Expo Center. It's a big expo pavilions with a capacity of 900 persons to accommodate per night. In 3 days, we changed the concept and it started to be a hub and to place people in different other centers, but we started to activate during the 26, 28 of February, and up till the 10th of March, we already had 45 centers with a total capacity of 4,000 people to accommodate per night. That was done together with the public partners like universities, and of course with the private partners, hotels, and so on and so on. So we had our capacities, and we had to do everything we could do in that sense. And I want to state once again that what is being said about Moldova, it's a small country with a very big heart. I've never seen such a solidarity. Just for you to imagine, we have this warehouse, big warehouse, where 600 volunteers were working to arrange all these products, clothes, and so on and so on. And we had thousands of people coming at least 10 to 14 days continuously to bring this help, and then volunteers put it on the shelves and so on and give to the people. So on the third day, the general concept of receiving center at Moldova Expo was that you don't stay more than 24 hours. Mainly there were kids and women, and we arranged to have all the necessary assistance from COVID testing. At that time it was quite actual, both for the Ukraine and for Republic of Moldova. It was March after Omicron wave. It was not so damaging as Delta one, 3 months before, but in any case, many of those who were asking for passing the border, because Moldova was a transit country, those Ukrainians who entered Moldova didn't stay more than 3 days, actually. Both in terms of those who had accommodation at the hotels, who rent apartment, or relatives. We have a lot of relatives in that region, and those who were accommodated by us. As I said, so we had different kind of accommodation. Hotels, campuses, this big hub center, and even big sports zones with a capacity from 400 to 800 people at a time. We arranged together with civil society and economic agents. So we had 3 weeks ago diploma ceremony, but just for you to imagine, if we were assuring for 1,000 people hot meals a day, then another 3,000 portions of hot meals were made by volunteers taking the products, going to Horeca, those where people are ordering for free, for example. Yes, it was such a consortium, let's say so. Yeah, even Horeca was very difficult to make it after COVID because they suffered a lot in terms of economic indicators and so on and so on. So, okay, so donations, as I said, were by the people, by the economic agents, and we had a lot of donations from our brothers in Romania, from cities, especially I would like to mention here Cluj and many other counties, and then our sister cities in Germany, in France, in Spain, a lot of assistance, and up till now, just for you to know, so we have quite good cooperation with Japan and Korea and some European countries that are offering by the day packages for those who are not placed in our accommodation center but still live on the territory of Chisinau. We estimate that there is a population of about 7,000 people. We don't know exactly what is the number because it's changing continuously. Okay, this was what we did in the first week. It was like 600 volunteers and 700 employees detached at all. So they did not manage anything in the city. This was public servant that were dealing with the refugee crisis. It was really very difficult. When we say 270, just have to imagine that it's 1 or 2 days. It's not an important sum, for example, for Germany or for any other city, but we had to to do it, to buy pillows, to buy in the first 2 days against the bidding rules. Okay. So transportation from the borders to Chisinau provided from the first day with our autobuses. There were 50 to 70 autobuses by day bringing people. In the first week, just for you to imagine, we had all the geographic area of the people because Odessa region is a commercial region. Then we have a lot of universities in Ukraine. That means we had a lot of people from Asia, China, India, Korea, and so on and so on. Then in the Middle East, a lot of countries, Northern Africa, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, and so on, even South America, Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and so on. One interesting thing that we learned is multiculturalism, because finally in 3 to 5 days we managed to organize to avoid conflicts and to for example, centers for Orthodox Jewish people, for Muslims separately, because of the eating, because of the praying, because of the historic issues, you know. So together with embassies and a lot of representatives of social society, we did it. Well, if to speak about the data up till now, so we had 22,000 refugees that were accommodated. There were several days that there was 4,000 people a day. There are more than 42 packages, that humanitarian packages that were distributed through what means a package, I was saying to Deputy Mayor. So it's not a bottle of anything, it's a big package for a family. Then when we speak about in terms of beneficiaries, then it's quite a big number of finally, so pastries, all kind of meat and fish and hygienic products. And the biggest challenge now is clothes for small kids, because it's 3 months, then in 6 months it's totally another, and so on and so on. So at the first stage, we had a lot of people coming in very bad position in terms of health. Many diabetics were decompensated 3, 4, 5 days, and so on. So we issued a minimum package of services that was primary health care, reception and distribution of food, social counseling services. Each adult person was counseled by a psychologist 2 times a day, and each kid was playing with our social assistant, social protection, child protection assistant, and so on and so on. Well, we had legal advice because in that terms, there were a lot of problems, a lot of people coming without their documents, without passports and so on. So migration and asylum. And now what we do right now is employment, education, medicine, asylum, occupational activities for children, pet care. Not a pet was allowed to be outside, not a person was allowed to be outside. So we managed to do everything that it's up to a certain standard. So now we have 831 persons enrolled in schools and kindergartens in Chisinau municipality. That means 90% of all the country. It was 400 more on 31 of May. People are returning back home, and that's a good issue. Hope this war and this aggression will finish as soon as possible. We have almost 10,000 medical refers, mainly to all the municipal hospitals, and now 1,500 young people with members of our municipal centers. And now we develop economic empowerment program to grant and to give small grants and to encourage common startups between Ukrainian youth and Moldovan youth to develop their businesses. Well, there are some data as well. The best and the nicest, I think, the 36 births in our municipal hospitals. All the system of care is oriented to data. We can speak about that, but I don't want to bother you too much. So what is now? Creating jobs and offer better livelihoods, increase economic growth, including through economic empowerment programs, improve social inclusion, so not a person left alone, promote the decoupling of living standards and economic growth from environmental resource use, and protect local and regional ecosystems. We still do a lot of holidays together, and many other. So what's important to say, even in that difficult times, I would like to assure you that in the first month, 90% of the pressure was on Chisinau city, and I've never seen such a solidarity between economic agents, simple people, and the local public administration, together with a lot of international missions and our partners in different EU countries, and not only EU countries. To conclude, not a person was without an accommodation, without a hot meal, and without assistance. Of course, we would like to finish everybody as soon as possible, if it is possible right now. But in any case, changing the protocols, learning from different kind of lessons, we are ready now. We are much more prepared than it was half a year ago to address these kind of problems. Thanks a lot, and hope war ends as soon as possible to avoid this aggression. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan Seban. Impressive organization and efficiency, but the key word was solidarity. This is what we have to learn from your experience, and now the floor is with you, Dionys Ternovsky, Deputy Major in UNECE, again, Republic of Moldova.
Okay. It's very difficult to speak after the mayor of our capital. But I will try to do my best. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. First of all, please let me welcome you and express my gratitude to you for the opportunity to participate to this event. We are all witnessing deeply traumatic events taking place in Ukraine today. Since the start of the war in the Ukraine, the people of Moldova, as well as national and local authorities, have opened their hearts and homes to those seeking refuge from the destruction and chaos left behind. UNECE, it's a small city. We are about 45,000 persons. It's located on the border with Romania and have become a refuge for rest, food, and place to decide on the next steps. Public institutions and other buildings were quickly set up by local and national authorities, as well as NGOs, to function as much-needed temporary shelters for refugees. The war in Ukraine clearly represents the worst security crisis since the Second World War. The exodus of the Ukrainian population is on unprecedented scale. The Republic of Moldova, although it responded remarkably quickly to these challenges, is an extremely vulnerable situation. The economy of the Republic of Moldova recently suffered a recession, followed by the energy crisis. The favorable attitude of the authorities and citizens of the Republic of Moldova to continue to offer assistance to refugees from Ukraine runs into the limited capacities of the public budget. Without generous help from abroad, Moldova will not cope. My presence at this session is determined by the desire to share the experience of Ungain city going through the COVID-19 pandemic and the refugee crisis, and especially the action taken to face these challenges. At the same time, I want to find out how other towns and cities have managed this crisis, solution, and the lesson they have learned and can share today with us. We learn by doing. We learn from the action taken, more based on intuition and empathy. What Ungain community did and how it got involved to help Ukrainian refugees, I am going to talk about in the following presentation. So you have to know that from an institutional point of view, Ungain, as other city in Moldova, was completely unprepared to manage the refugee flow. Since independence, Moldova hasn't faced this type of crisis. Therefore, we don't have neither experience nor a legal framework to act fast and efficiently. The biggest challenge was due to the lack of specialized management center. Up until today, we still don't have a team or a public function officially responsible for refugee situation management. When refugees arrived in Ungain, they were hosted by the Moldovan people in their households. Due to lack of dedicated infrastructure, we had to improvise and use the buildings of the cultural center, for example, and touristic center as points for temporary housing, in spite of their lack of facility for this purpose. A few weeks after the refugees arrived, the Social Assistance Directory finally accredited 2 centers in Ungain and Skulen village. However, because of lack of option, these centers were set up in buildings that haven't been renovated since UNECE and didn't have anything but some beds with old mattresses. So we created in our city hall a crisis cell, and responsible persons have been appointed, and we talk about persons that who deal with social assistance, culture, and sports employees. Apart from the basic work, until now, these employees volunteer by serving refugees daily through the following actions: offering donation of food, hygiene products, finding hosts, jobs, etc. The campaign together with Ukraine was launched from 25th February. It was a very important campaign because we understood and learned that we are a united society, that we have many organizations that have not been seen much until now. But when needed, they can help a lot, often replacing the government. This is the number of refugees who crossed our city, and the number of refugees who stayed in the city in this moment are 314 about. There are a lot of women and also a lot of children. What we learned, we understand better the migration phenomenon. We develop intercultural competence. We develop an interaction with refugees. Obviously, we interact a lot of local community. And it's very important for us, for our city, the support of European organization. Because we have a budget only for maintenance and not for development. Thanks to the support from European Union and the USA, at this moment we have more than 10 projects in implementation. The value of the foreign projects at the moment exceeds the amount of several million euros, which for us can be considered a success. So this project is for development of comfortable urban environment, for transport, for infrastructure of transport, for the historical, cultural and tourist sectors, for rehabilitation of public utility networks. So it was very important for us, this support. And the immediate challenges are absolutely, we have to create the condition for placing children in preschool and educational institution. We don't have spaces for temporary accommodation, and we have to find a job for refugees. Absolutely, it's important. And about the city of Ungheni, I hope very much for my citizens that we will have the opportunity to build a vehicle bridge across the river Prut that separates Moldova and Romania. This is a big project that is discussed for 30 years, and until now we don't have this bridge. And I hope that we will have in the next year. As we know, recently Moldova obtained the status of candidate in the European Union. So it's very important for us to improve the connection between the city of Ungheni and Europe. And regarding the refugees crisis, we refer to the identification and construction of a center for their shelter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dionys Tarnowski. The collaboration you are receiving from the population is really great while you are organizing the next step. So now the floor is with Horia Tomescu, Deputy Mayor in Bucharest, Romania. I kindly ask to stay a bit in time because we started with a bit of delays and we need to recon. Thank you.
I'll be very fast.
Yes.
Okay. It is an honor for me to address this prestigious body of the Economic Commission for Europe and share with you how Bucharest has been tackling challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukrainian refugee crisis, as well as some thoughts on the resources needed to continue and improve our response. Since the pandemic first reached Romania's border in full force back in early 2020, Bucharest has adopted measures to mitigate its effect on the most vulnerable economic sectors and communities, while also benefiting from legislation at the national level. Here are some challenges we have faced locally and the action that I believe were most effective in our COVID-19 response. We took concrete measures to protect the hospitality industry through measures like tax exemptions and cancelling penalties on debts. To protect the economically vulnerable, we set up temporary shelter facilities and warm meals, bathing facilities, psychological and medical support. For the senior population, we prepared daily shippable food packages and we provided basic digital education to teach them to place orders online. And for school children, we had to transition into online learning, which we had for 1.5 years. To tackle the sharp increase in domestic violence, we developed more residential services with non-stop intervention capability. And of course, all these actions were meant to complement the local public health measures aimed at controlling the spread of the virus. This was a massive endeavor that really tested the resilience of the medical health system, especially during community transmission peaks, but more generally because of the duration and the scale of the effort involved. We took steps to adapt our hospitals and to create more beds to care for the sick, but also to prevent virus spreading through action like information and vaccination campaign, creating stationary and mobile vaccination centers, investing in preventing the infection of vulnerable, mobile, and high interaction population groups. The main challenges that the healthcare system have definitely been the insufficient human resources, which led to long work hours in a highly stressful, high-stakes, and high-risk environment, with little time for decompression. Another challenge has been to offer housing for people who lost their jobs or who could no longer afford a home. Two trends are relevant: the decline in the young, active population living in the city, which the pandemic accelerated, the tendency of young people to migrate to the suburbs of the city, where they could afford to buy larger properties for their families. This has left the central areas of the city occupied by an aging or newly unemployed population. The second is the evolution of the city's housing stock over the past years. The number of public dwellings in Bucharest has seen a sharp decline of over 45%, and the decreasing trend continues. While dealing with this situation, Ukraine was attacked by Russia on the 24th of February in a brutal, unprovoked war, which has no place in the 21st century and which has led to senseless loss of life and displacement of millions of people. Approximately 1.4 million Ukrainians have transited Romania since, and the vast majority of them have transited the country to Bucharest. So in the first months since the start of this aggression, our focus was on immediate response to temporarily house, feed, clothe, and offer all the social assistance services that were required for a population made up mostly of women and children, with little to no understanding of the Romanian language or the Romanian people and institutions. These are some of the most impactful actions that we have taken in the first phase of the crisis response. Of course, temporary housing was one of the biggest issues. We managed to put up around 4,000 temporary beds in 92 accommodation facilities by the end of the first week of March. With respect to food, the municipality has provided over 200,000 meals for accommodation centers and 20,000 meals for Ukrainian transiting the Bucharest airport. We have also partnered with the World Central Kitchen, and at the North train station, which is the central station of Bucharest, we deployed a non-stop intervention team to facilitate the transit of refugees with the help of local civil organizations and private citizens. We offered information and transportation to accommodation center, to medical center, bus stations, or the airport. Collection of donation was also a big part of the intervention in the first phase of the crisis. We set up 3 centers where we collected and sorted through more than 500 tons of donations from private citizens, organizations, and economic actors. The second phase of the intervention has meant taking action to integrate the families which have chosen Bucharest as a temporary home. We are now hosting between 65,000 and now we are approaching to 55,000 refugees which chose Bucharest. Some of them are returning, some of them are back and forth, but we are into 55 to 65,000 refugees which are hosted by Bucharest. So this means, first of all, long-term housing, which was ensured through a government program which has put around 90% of refugees in Bucharest and privately owned apartments. Secondly, we needed to provide long-term access to food and basic necessities, which we accomplished through the free supermarket program, which so far has assisted over 100,000 people. So from COVID, we changed a little bit the view. We wanted for the refugees to have we didn't want to provide fixed packages because the needs of the refugees are different. So we opened from donations, we opened a free supermarket. So the people are coming like in a normal supermarket and they are provided with clothing and food and hygienic products and small apparatus for them to make food for their small children. So, third, access to education for children and employment opportunities for adults. We opened 3 daycare centers during the summer where children could play and be engaged in age-appropriate activities. We are currently in the process of opening 2 Primo Hub centers for daycare, learning and play. We partnered with UNECE to open a summer school where children could learn Romanian and to integrate more easily in the Romanian school system. We now offer after-school programs so as to allow parents to keep a full-time job. We also provide information on local businesses looking to hire Ukrainians, even if so far people have generally been reluctant to make medium and long-term plans. It is clear to me that the city could not shoulder the burden of providing such large-scale assistance alone. Some of the immediate challenges that we face are preparing for the contingency scenario of an escalation of the conflict, providing housings in publicly owned dwellings or through local budget resources, stimulating the resident Ukrainian refugee population in interest in medium and long-term integration in the local job market, to reduce the pressure on offering long-term social benefits, integrating more Ukrainian children in the Romanian school system, because the Romanian language is very different than Ukrainian language. It's a big step for the Ukrainian children to learn Romanian. Rent-free increases due to many apartments being rented to Ukrainian through the government program, so the rents in Bucharest grew exponentially because of this program, which provides for Ukrainian refugees. Managing the local population support of long-term social assistance for the Ukrainian refugees in the context of rising housing rates, rising energy bills, and general instability. I am convinced that the best possible response to the crisis we have faced in the last 3 years is integrated interventions at the local level with a support network that includes citizens, civil society organizations, other local administration, national authorities, European institutions, and global humanitarian agencies. In other words, together we can solve any problem and emerge stronger after any crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, you did well. Good. Thank you, Javier Tomescu. Now the floor is with Andrzej Borawski, Executive Director of Polish Association of Cities.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting us here. We met together during World Urban Forum in Katowice at the end of June, where we had the common stand of Polish cities and Ukrainian cities. And it was quite impressive for the people from the whole world to see us together. Since the beginning of this war in Ukraine, aggression of Soviet soldiers, in Poland occurred a kind of miracle of opening hearts, opening everyone to the refugees. The last time the situation of explosion of solidarity, it was in 1981 when the solidarity movement was organized in our country against totalitarian system. And the beginning, of course, very similar to the situation described by my colleagues from Moldova and Romania. Except some differences, the most important was that even before the war, 1.5 million Ukrainians were in Poland. They were staying in our country. The most of them were working in our country. Not necessarily the ordinary employment. They were high, there were a lot of engineers, people with high competences working in the responsible places. So it was an important part of our labor market, the guests from Ukraine. And that's why, since the beginning of the war, the majority of the initial wave of refugees exactly knew where they are going. They were not interested in any temporary location. They had addresses. They were going to friends, and especially to their families and their relatives already staying in the country. Of course, it changed quickly because many women with children were really without any idea. They needed important help. And until today, the result of this not controlled movement of refugees is that they are staying in large cities. They are afraid to go to the province. And this huge amount of Ukrainians in Poland is not only a challenge for our country. I have to stress that it's only the chance. That is also the chance for us. It's we have the second largest population decline in the European Union. The amount of children decreases dramatically. So there are many empty rooms in schools, for example. We can easily organize the education for those Ukrainian children who want to come to Polish schools. Not all of them want, because they still have the opportunity to continue education online. There is the cooperation with the Ukrainian Ministry of Education, and they do it. But some of them are, even now, in last weeks, coming back to Ukraine. Even if they started the education at the beginning of September, at the end of September they left to Ukraine because they found the reason, or they simply wanted to go back home, to go back to homeland. Generally, the circumstances of their life in Poland are, of course, worse than at home. Thanks to good legislation which were prepared together by the central government and our associations, it is not very often, it doesn't happen very often, such a good cooperation with central government. But the legislation was creating the situation of refugees at almost the same level as our citizens. In some areas even better, because they were allowed not to pay for public transportation and so on. Of course, now the situation is changing, and medium-sized and smaller cities are still waiting for refugees, because they are already able to invite them, and no refugees are coming. The most of refugees are with Polish families or with their families which earlier were staying in Poland, or with Polish families. So there are no camps in our country, and there are still diminishing number of temporary locations. And the last info is that together with the especially appointed minister for this refugees crisis a few months ago, we elaborated the common program of our government for medium-sized and smaller cities to support this relocation from big cities to smaller towns, the Ukrainian refugees, by organizing the integrated reception. Dwelling, school, work, employment, and of course the medical service is already open for them. It's centralized system in our country. We don't have much influence on it, but they have the same basic laws for medicine as Polish citizens. And we hope that through this integration, which is important in the city of Lublin, it exists the civic committee for the Polish-Ukrainian cooperation, consisting of Polish public officials, Polish NGOs, and Ukrainian refugees. And this is the way of acting now, because we want to dissolve some problems together with them. And the last point in my short presentation is about direct assistance of Polish cities to our Ukrainian sister cities. We have approximately 400 Ukrainian twin cities. Some of them are no more under Ukrainian control because they are in Crimea or Lugansk or Donetsk districts. But we are sending to Ukraine Polish cities. Not the government gives significant assistance as well. But we as local communities, we have sent many buses, many other equipment for local infrastructure, a lot of money from our budget directly. It was one change in our legislation. We were allowed financially support the foreign communities, but of course we are supporting now mainly Ukrainian communities. So there's cooperation, and we are now trying to begin common thinking together with Ukrainian cities about restoration of Ukraine after the war. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei Poraski. As your colleague from Romania, Horia Tomescu, you highlighted the integration problems and how to manage the complexity of the integration. Now the floor is for Tomasz Fizolek, Executive Director, Union of Polish Metropolis.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experience connected with the war of Ukraine and our refugees. I want to draw your attention on data because my colleagues told about the situation in each city, and it's very, very important. They remind the solidarity, open hearts, and so on, and it's very, very important, and we've got a lot of evidence of it. And I want to thank all of our citizens, or our cities mostly. But in Union of Polish Metropolises, we decided to count it, to find some more data about our refugees. And that's why our Research and Analysis Center in Union of Polish Metropolises prepare some reports about the Ukrainian refugees. We know, at the beginning, we know only the numbers from the border guards registers. We know how many people cross the border, but we don't know where they go. My colleague mentioned that a lot of refugees visit her friends, families in Poland, because before the war we've got 1.5 million Ukrainians in Poland. but we don't know exactly where they go. And we prepare a first report, Urban Hospitality, Unprecedented Growth, Challenges and Opportunities, a report on Ukrainian refugees in the largest Polish cities. And we've got all of reports I will be mentioned are in Polish and in English. I got few printed version, I've got few pen drives, but all of them are on our website. And I hope that you will be interested in it, because we use very modern methodology to find out how many people from Ukraine, how many people from Ukraine came to Poland. Most of data in Poland and in other countries came from public registers. And of course it's obvious, but there is a kind of mistake because it's not very precise. And we decided to use an innovative method called geotrapping. And we were talking with Madam Secretary about it, and perhaps we can collaborate and coordinate the next steps about this issue. And this method, aggregating information from mobile devices, made it possible to determine the number and location of Ukrainians and Ukrainian women, persons aged 15 and over, residing in Poland. It's at the beginning, because it was not enough for us, and we cross-reference this data with information from the public register on PESEL numbers, which is then made it possible to estimate the number of Ukrainian children living in Poland. And we did it on April. After that, we did some update of the report, and we show the cities, how the estimation of number of Ukrainian nationals in the cities, March, April, and May 2022. And we presented this report to our mayors, because they don't know exactly how many new inhabitants in citizens in their city were. You mentioned about the solidarity and open hearts, and we try to count it. We use another method, and we prepare another report, Neighborly Help, resident of the 12 largest Polish cities on helping refugees from Ukraine. And here we use the technique employed was CATI, computer-assisted telephone interview. And we've got 12,000 respondents participated. And then we know exactly how our citizens help Ukrainians, what are their fears, what are their hopes, and so on. And this is the third one. And perhaps you noticed it yet, but I want to highlight, we never say the word problem. We said that there is a challenge, there is opportunity, as my colleague mentioned, and that's why our reports, it's kind of setback only, but it's kind of opportunity. This is the most important for us. But it was not enough for us, and we use opportunity when our Ukrainian friends, refugees, were standing in a queue for our ID Polish number, PESEL. And we get a survey with the paper questionnaires, and we ask 3,655 people from Ukraine what are their hopes, fears, and what are expectations about Poland and predictions about the war. So this is another one. And then the last, I want to mention about the last report called Social and Psychological Effects of Selected Housing Solution for Refugees from Ukraine. Our committee, the topic of housing is very important, and we prepare with the think tank City Foundation this report, and we try to point out the solution and challenges connected with shelter halls, use of community facilities, holiday facilities, temporary housing, sharing home with refugee families, staying with one's Ukrainian family or friends, and so on. We try to map all the ways where our friends started to live after they visit Poland, and we've got some challenges and some solutions here. This report is not launched. I think it will be in few weeks. Not few, perhaps in next week. At the beginning of the war, we working with our work groups, and we met a lot with crisis management team, but not only. Today I received information from a colleague from the bureau that in a week we've got another work group called Migration and Integration Work Group. And in 10 days, we will be talking about cities facing the refugee crisis, past, present, and future. The cities facing the refugee crisis, past, present, and future. And we want to summary of activities undertaken so far by the cities. Because it's in the past, of course, present, but the future is connected not only with the war, but simply with the winter. Perhaps it will be another challenge for our country, our cities to face. And the emerging crisis and a lot of things. And in the end, this is the common, I want to mention about our common initiative by the local government. We invite all of group from the Ukrainians to central government and non-government organization, of course, local government, and of course, and also business, to Wrocław to talk about the refugee challenges, and we called it white paper, and there are more than 200 pages of report when we organize subtables titled Social Integration and Civic Activities, Housing, Education and Science, Finance, what else, Healthcare and Social Welfare. I mention about it because in Poland we've got, translated into English, all of this, a lot of data which we presented to the central government. We of course share it with our mayors in our cities to govern better. And this is our attitude to the crisis, because we are the umbrella organization and we try to help our members. In Union of Polish Metropolises are 12 biggest cities in Poland. In Association of Polish Cities, there are more than 350 cities. So, excuse me? And towns. And towns, thank you. So we represent a lot of groups of our local government, and this is the way how we can help not only our mayors, but the central governments too. And that's it. If someone wants to take a copy, please, a digital version, and on our website we've got, and we prepare to repeat these reports, because we know that the situation is changed, and the estimates we want to see how it changed. So this is it. For a while, thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for highlighting the importance of data, which is crucial for managing the situation currently, but also to prepare the next steps. Now I invite Tassos Krikoukis, Ambassador, Diplomatic Advisor of the measure in Athens. Please, Tassos.
Thank you, Mr. De Carli, Madam Chairman, dear friends. We have now in front of us an excellent document prepared by the Secretariat. I found this document pragmatic because it's like an X-ray of the situation. Maybe some data may differ, but that's not of importance. The importance is in the document. So this document reminds us that we owe ourselves to commit to the home front. This, after all, is shaping up to be the winter of our discontent. All predictions are sobering. High energy prices, triggered by supply disruptions, could very easily, as a result, in a cold, unjust, and expensive winter for millions of people globally, and in Europe, of course, where energy poverty reaches unprecedented levels. Unfortunately, this is not a one winter problem. I use problem. It's not a challenge, it's really a problem. We will get through this crisis, but we have to prepare ourselves for the next one. There is no back to normal. This is a time for European solidarity. We have a long and hard road ahead in tackling the energy crisis in Europe. It is not only a climate crisis. It is also a national security crisis, a challenge to our sovereignty. In response, we need to think global and act local. And in our case, think European, but act local. The role of cities and local authorities is crucial now. Unfortunately, we have lost precious time and have counted on cheap energy to facilitate our green transition. We have known for years, and we never made it a priority and seriously acted on it. We need to act now with one strategy: decentralization, in two directions. First, that means on the one hand, put an end to energy dependence, and on the other, we have to succeed in our green transition. At the same time, we have to accelerate renewables, their deployment, but this cannot be accomplished with us just issuing edicts. We need to give our hand. No matter what we do, the most important thing is to take people along with us and make sure we give them a safety net to minimize hardship and suffering. This is a time of unity, putting aside parties, ideologies, and egos. We need synergies between all levels of government to foster implementation, and I'm thinking of the declaration we adopted yesterday. That means implementation is very substantial. Top down, we need coordination, financing tools, including, that's a paramount element, direct financing for cities, especially for those hosting the refugees. I was last week with the mayor of Athens in Prague for the conference of the members of the Pact of Free Cities. We are members from the very beginning, and it is an initiative struggling for the need of the direct financing for cities. Institutionally, in the European context, it's not an easy thing, but gradually we see some progress, and at the end, I'm confident we will succeed because direct financing to cities is a necessity. We have to support the idea that power belongs to citizens and cities are the institution closest to the citizen. So, that was for top-down. For bottom-up, only one word, two words, self-reliance. Ladies and gentlemen, many mayors around Europe are working towards fair and inclusive cities. Cities that support the most vulnerable among us and leave nobody behind. It is an ambitious but worthwhile goal. Unsustainable energy and living costs are mines in the road ahead that can blow up all the efforts. We are at serious risk now at exacerbating poverty, inequality, and homelessness by limiting access of the most vulnerable to lighting, cooling, and refrigeration, clean cooking, and heating. Families should not need to choose between food and paying their energy costs. The cost of this effort cannot fall on the most vulnerable, marginalized, and discriminated people living in our societies. Refugees and those who receive them and are in need merit our absolute attention and our assistance. But assistance doesn't mean only money. It can be realized in many other forms as assistance in kind, direct investment, joint ventures, trade preferences, facilitation of visas, scholarships. But, of course, transfer of know-how in this situation is very important. The assistance to refugees is a global challenge that we need to manage collectively, especially at an EU level. We Greeks are aware of the enormous difficulties refugees and migrants face today, as Greece was for a long time an emigration country, and only 3 decades ago it became an immigration country. But the Greeks don't forget the difficulties they had faced themselves in the past. Greece has provided safe haven for over 1 million people, that is over 10% of our population, in the last 7 years. And Athens had to bear the biggest burden. We must not forget that since 2009, Greece experienced the most dramatic financial crisis in Europe, worsened by an unimaginable wave of many thousands of refugees in 2015. So we had to work, we had a heavy work in front of us. We reinvigorated the city by investing in affordable housing for those who need it. We have operated a guest house for victims of violence and discriminatory practices, provided free of charge legal help and psychological support to the victims, and instigated a program for supporting homeless drug users. For the first time in Greece, the city of Athens has been able to provide a safe place for homeless drug users in their effort to fight addiction. And there was no discrimination in this field. We had witnessed the transition of many refugees towards integration, and we took action in this direction to promote social cohesion. We have been proactive by establishing points of reference to provide services to refugees and migrants, like the Migrants Integration Center, and coordination mechanisms, such as the Athens Coordination Center for Migrants and Refugees, and the city's network for refugees, the CNI. Please note here that the City of Athens follows the inclusive model. That means that refugees and migrants have equal access in all public services with Greek citizens. We understood that job market needs assessment by city and sector, and the mapping of skills of the refugees population in a regular and systematic manner is very important. Today, we are focusing on adults' education, urging for their enrollment in Greek language courses, as you did in Bucharest. Women and girls, boys' participation in the city life and decision-making process, that's important for their integration, to be part of the decision-making process. And third, most importantly, on access to the job market. As far as the Ukrainians are concerned, where the situation is similar to what Mr. Poravsky just said. It's really, for us, it has not had been a difficult case. It's exactly for the job market, because first of all, we didn't have so many Ukrainian refugees. It's, I don't know if geo-trapping of Mr. Kinolek agrees, but we had about 25,000, which was, I mean, we are used to much bigger numbers. But there were a lot of Ukrainians who were already in Greece from the late 90s, and that they were received by their families, so the amount of people we had to care of was not so big. And it was easier. Why? Because we had an enormous amount of people coming from Asia or from Africa. And there, the job creation, I mean, jobs, to find them jobs, was a very difficult task, because many of them didn't know how to read or to write, so we had to push them in the agricultural sector outside of Athens to find a job. But the Ukrainians were a different case, because the Ukrainians were of high-level education, they had already a digital experience, so that's why I say the situation was smoother. And last but not least, we understood that arts and culture are a powerful medium for integration. Now, we are happy, it's a victory. We are dismantling the Eleonas refugee camp in Athens. You know that there was an enormous camp for refugees in the middle of the city, and you don't know that. And we are happy that there is no need anymore to keep it, and there are, I hope, guardians who will be on the place. We are ready to share our expertise with those friends who need it, as we know that each and every one is part of our resilience. Athens is ready to help the mayors in need and wishes to send a message of hope, unity, and solidarity. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador, for your realistic, pragmatic, and strategic contribution. To conclude the last speech of this panel, I invite Mr. Graham Alabaster, Head of Geneva Office, UN Habitat. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we're very delighted to be here as Habitat and as a key partner of UNECE. I'd just like to share just some short reflections from our policy and practice work that we've been doing over the past couple of years to address what my executive director refers to as the 3 C's of conflict, COVID, and climate. I mean, it's an unprecedented time that we're living in, but we do have to see a way forward, and I share with you some ideas from our lessons that we would like to, we think should be looked at. Perhaps the most important thing for us is the financialization of housing that's happened over the past few years. We've seen this retreat of the public housing sector, and the thing is that with the affordability issue, it drives challenges in all of the other areas of adequate housing, you know, in the access to services and habitability, accessibility, and all the other things. So this is a really important area that needs some focus. And if we look at some of the statistics, and a recent study from OECD pointed out that 1 in 3 people amongst low-income renters spend over 40% of their income. Now that as itself sounds a statistic that we can understand, but if we dig into the detail of the statistics and we look at how that figure changes, if we look, you know, and see the different sections of society, we find it changes. So with overcrowding, although from an SDG report in the EU, overcrowding in the region was put at 17% overall, for the poorer in society, overcrowding is 29%. If we look at the non-EU migrants, it goes up to 36%. So the devil is in the detail with respect to data, if we to understand this picture fully. So it's really important that we work on the data side. In terms of existing policy tools and good practices, there are some well-established examples around. The Housing 2030 initiative, of course, comes to mind immediately. But we do need to revisit a lot of these tools and see how they can support policy making to play a purposeful and long-term role in shaping more affordable, inclusive and sustainable housing. I think also in the face of increasing costs of living, and particularly, as we heard from the previous speaker, in relation to energy, we need to ensure a balanced and fair tenant-landlord relationships, looking more closely at security of tenure, setting of fair rents, and adequate quality standards. And, you know, this is, of course, going to be a challenge for sustainable housing construction and renovation, particularly in light of the climate goals. We also, in many of our towns and cities, have to better understand homelessness, which is a sad fact of life as a result of these impacts. And you know, these affordability changes which are already increasingly being felt of Europe will be further hampered by the energy requirements, energy efficiency requirements of the housing sector as we move forward to meet climate goals. And I think we've probably underestimated what that impact is going to be. As somebody said, it's not just one winter ahead of us, it's a long-term thing we have to address. At UN Habitat, we've made sure that we've sort of put housing at the centre of our renewed strategic plan. And we've done this for a very good reason, because we feel that housing, we should look in the broadest sense, including, of course, the land use sector, but also, more importantly, the infrastructure. And how, you know, it's really important for us to realise that housing isn't just a roof and 4 walls, but it must have good access to infrastructure and services, and of course be connected to employment, schools, public spaces, and other opportunities that we need for a good urban life. So this putting housing at the centre doesn't mean that we're excluding these things. We have to move along in parallel, and this is imperative if we want good socio-economic development and sustainability in our future cities. I think that one other area that we've heard many examples of, and which we really need to, of course, mainstream, is the need to ensure inclusive and empowered participation of communities within planning processes, housing policy tools and programs. And I think this, in turn, will encourage the development of different housing types and different systems. We heard from Lord Foster about the need to engage communities in the design of their living environment. And I think this is a very important thing as we move forward. I think housing as well has become much more multi-sectoral. We always hear about multi-level governance for managing housing, land and urban development. but multi-sectorality comes alive at the level of the city and the town, and it's really truly where we see the different sectors relating to housing and infrastructure and urban development come together. I've mentioned already about the need for strengthened data collection and evidence-based policies, and there are new and encouraging approaches available for us to collect this data. It's very important, of course, that this data is spatially disaggregated, so we have a much better understanding of these pockets of poverty in our communities, and that, you know, that sometimes can be difficult to govern, to understand. And I think really, in conclusion, the point I would like to make is that yes, there's a crisis on at the moment, as we know, but let's try and be vigilant and understand that this is an opportunity for us to rethink housing and urban development now. We've learned a lot from COVID about how housing structures can change, how urban space can be managed, and how before vaccines come along, you rely on classic public health measures, and housing and people's health is, of course, inextricably linked. And looking at health as well, it's not just about the physical health. We know people need food, water, and shelter to live. There's also, of course, the aspects of mental health, which we know all too well are ravaging our cities and neighborhoods and result in lawlessness, crime, drug abuse. So this opportunity of using housing to address some of these long-term issues of health. The other very interesting issue, which again is cross-cutting between climate and health, is of course what will happen with the next pandemic. We know, or we hear from the experts, that the next pandemic will be also based on zoonotic disease, and it will mean we have to understand the relationship between the human living environment and the animal environment better. We're already finding that some diseases like malaria and dengue are finding their way into some cities in this region because of climate change where they've never been evident before. So housing and the urban environment provides a great opportunity for us to future-proof a lot of our towns and cities to some of these threats. Some of the threats we can't do anything about, but these things we can. So let's try and see how we can use this rethinking our urban space to turn into an opportunity rather than a challenge. Thank you very much for your attention, and Excellencies.
Thank you, Graham. Unfortunately, we are running very late, out of time. Let me thank all the contributors for the important and strategic contributions. We collected different experiences, many angles of view. We learned a lot on efficiency, on solidarity, on social collaboration. We understood the impact of the COVID, which has been really heavy in all these countries. And I think we all capitalized the work done during the COVID, especially on digitalization. I think there is something we can do after these interesting days and after what we learned today, is to go back to the declaration we signed yesterday. I'm sure we can find a good indication on how to work on all these topics in the next months, and I hope not, but years. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the audience. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I also would like to thank the panelists for the excellent speakers, presentation that they did and the messages that they delivered. And also thank you to Mr. Giulio De Carli, that moderated this session. As it was mentioned, we were running out of time because of the delay that we started, but also because it went a bit more than the provided agenda. So we go now to the next item of the agenda, and I thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was excellent.
Thank you.
And may I, in meanwhile, I read the decision for this part, that the committee takes note of the background document and the panel discussion of its main findings. Now we start the agenda item 9, promoting access to affordable housing to women and youth. The relevant supporting document for this agenda item is ECE/HBP/2022/5. The ECE program level evaluation of gender mainstreaming in ECE was conducted in 2019 and included a recommendation to make it mandatory for all secretary to committees, among others, to discuss gender mainstreaming at sessions of sectorial committees, conventions, and working groups. Following the recommendation, experts will be invited to deliver a presentation on how to promote accessibility of affordable and adequate housing for women and youth. I would like also to inform that in our discussion in the Bureau, we have highlighted the problem also of the young people in accessing housing. This is due to many reasons, but mostly for related with unemployment, with economic crisis, and with low wages for young people, and on the other side, increasing prices of housing in the market and both rental and for sale. So that's why we also included this together with the gender issue, which perhaps looks that is not so critical in our region. But as different speakers highlighted in their presentation, the category of women and violated or victims of violations are in focus of policies for access to housing, adequate and affordable housing. So now I invite the speakers, Mr. Stefan Getz, Director, Center of Excellence on Youth Homelessness Prevention, Professor and President of the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, York University, Canada, and Ms. Melanie Riedman, President, Away Home, working together to end youth homelessness, again from Canada. The floor is yours.
There, that's better. Wow, I can even hear myself now. So thank you for the introduction. We're glad to be here. Melanie and I co-lead the Toronto Centre of Excellence on Youth Homelessness Prevention. And so we're happy to be here to meet colleagues and look at the work we can do to change things.
We'd also like to thank the officials of San Marino for welcoming us to this important event.
Does that mean I'm going to stand back here? Oh. There we go. Okay, thank you. So we'll begin. We're going to start by talking about women, girls, gender diverse people, and housing precarity and homelessness, and then move on to talking about youth and concluding how we think we need to tie these things together through SDGs and a focus on well-being. So in terms of women, housing and homelessness, I'm going to review some things we've learned in Canada most of these things will make sense to all of you, whatever context you're in. They're not just purely Canadian. And I'm going to draw on a report that we participated in that was an examination, a literature review on what we know about women's need for housing and the experience of homelessness in Canada. And so, to set the context, there are 8 key challenges that I think really help us make sense of all this, right? And the first one is that women's experience of housing precarity and homelessness is often not visible. Women often in these situations don't wind up engaging with the homelessness services or get the help they need, and so often continue to leave in poverty. The other thing, and this will be not news to people here, is that in Canada there's a profound lack of safe, affordable, adequate and appropriate housing. And so women suffer in that many ways from that more than men. There's lack of women-specific housing supports. And what that means is that women, and often with children, wind up in emergency homeless shelters, which are not designed to support family situations like that. We also need to understand that homelessness is uniquely dangerous to women. In Canada, we've done research on criminal victimization, and we found in one survey we did that 38% of all women reported being sexually assaulted in the previous 12 months while they were homeless. So this puts an additional burden on women and also creates trauma. In Canada, we organize our support systems between a violence against women sector and a homelessness sector. Those two sectors should be pulling in the same direction, but they're not. It's siloing at its worst. And then in Canada, one thing to pay special attention to is that Indigenous people, who make up less than 5% of the Canadian population, make up a third of all people who experience homelessness. And so their experience as Indigenous women means that they are doubly and triply marginalized because they face discrimination and racism. 7, mothers' experiences of homelessness can lead to intergenerational homelessness. And 8, multiple and compounding public system failures drive women and their children into housing instability, and they often stay mired in that. So we're not doing a good job. And the research shows some key findings. So women are much more likely to live in poverty than are men in Canada. Women who are families that are led by women are twice as likely to be in core housing need, meaning they're spending more than 30% of their total income on housing. So on any given day, there are around 9,000 women in Canada who are experiencing homelessness. In 1 year, almost 70,000 women and their children were admitted to violence against women shelters. So there's a lot here that we know about the particular conditions that women live in that are worth highlighting. First, if we want to address the housing needs of women, we have to address poverty, because the two are absolutely linked. Second, we also know that many women, whether they have children or not, wind up homeless because of breakdown in relationships due to violence, experiencing violence. And we need to address the fact that we have a real problem. We kind of turn things upside down. Women who are experiencing violence in the home often have to leave the home with their children, while the perpetrator of the violence gets to keep the home. So a violent situation ensures that the perpetrator is fine, still has housing, and the woman doesn't. That's a problem we have to fix, because that's totally backwards and upside down. Third, we need to really tailor our services and supports to different subpopulations of women, including Indigenous, LGBTQ, and gender-diverse people. Fourth, the emergency response to homelessness in Canada, while well-meaning, meaning emergency shelters and violence against women shelters, while well-meaning, it does not prevent or end women's homelessness. And fifth, our public systems are failing women. Such public systems should not contribute to the breakup of the family. And I'll give you an example. Women who experience homelessness and have children, the children are often apprehended by child protection services. And if a woman does get housing, often she will want her, her children back. But to get housing to enable you to get your children back, you have to have housing that has a certain number of rooms. It's a requirement. But the housing providers will only give you a single bedroom or a single room apartment if you don't have your children with you. So you can't get your children back, and you don't have the adequate housing. So there are these kind of inconsistencies that are highly problematic. So all of this we're going to take into account in a minute when we talk about how we should be thinking about what is the best way to approach the issue of affordability and housing precarity. There we go.
Thank you. So Steve's Research Institute at York University and our national charity, Away Home, we're in the midst of a $42 million investment from the Government of Canada on figuring out youth homelessness prevention and sustained exits from homelessness. And so we're learning a lot, and I'm just going to talk about some of the things we know about housing stabilization and young people. So there are 8 key challenges when thinking about young people, housing precarity, and the experience of homelessness. So 1, they're young people. So they often lack life skills. They haven't lived independently, and we need to remember that. 2, they're in the midst of adolescent development. And so that has a lot of implications. And it may contribute to mental health challenges for young people. 3, young people who have been taken into care are exponentially more likely to experience housing precarity and homelessness. And so that's a direct pipeline from the care system, state care, where we're supposed to be protecting young people, into homelessness. 4, young people with significant adverse childhood experiences are more likely to experience housing precarity and homelessness later in life. 5, young people often experience discrimination when trying to access housing. A lot of landlords don't want to rent to young people. And 6, young people who first experience homelessness before they were 16 are incredibly vulnerable and experience many more challenges than young people that experience homelessness after the age of 16 for the first time. And in Canada, as Steve mentioned, we have the challenge around our history of colonialism, and Indigenous young people are much more likely to experience housing precarity and homelessness, and at the same time to receive worse supports and services. And finally, the prolonged experience of homelessness undermines health and well-being for youth long-term. And so when we let young people become mired in homelessness, their health worsens and worsens quickly. Their mental health declines. They're at risk of dropping out of school and are usually forced to because they don't have stable housing, and that leads to a lot of precarity in their lives. They're often the victims of exploitation and victims of crime. They have increased involvement with the law and compounding traumatic experiences and greater risk of addictions. And this leads to very quick entrenchment in life on the streets. And we know from research that generally have about a 2-year window to get in and intervene before a young person becomes entrenched, and it becomes much more difficult for them to recover from the experience of homelessness. We also know from research that pathways off the streets, when young people either exit homelessness through existing services and supports, or of their own activity pulling themselves up out of homelessness, they're not living well. And so they're living very precariously, they're not socially included, and they're not re-engaging with education and training and employment. So we need to remember, we're waiting way too long to intervene. Second, the experience of homelessness has a devastating impact on health, safety, mental health, and well-being. Third, some young people, Indigenous, LGBTQ2S, newcomer youth, experience the additional burden of discrimination and exclusion. And we need to know, and we need to name, that the emergency response does not prevent or end youth homelessness. As well, our public systems are failing to prevent youth homelessness, and we need to address those systems. They have to be part of co-creating the solutions. That's the work that we have underway in Canada. It's not just for the homelessness sector and the services to fix this problem, it's for all of these systems to work together. And finally, people with lived experience of youth homelessness strongly profess the need to shift to prevention. We also need to remember, very important to consider with young people, models of accommodation for housing different than adults, because they're not young people experiencing housing precarity or homelessness, they're young people, and we need to remember that, they're young people. So what would the young people in your life need? Sometimes we support them to return home or live with other family members where it's safe. Sometimes supportive housing is appropriate, crisis housing may be necessary, transitional housing, and scattered site independent living. And it needs to be dependent on the individual and what age and stage they're at and what they need and what they vocalize. Stephen?
Thank you. So, based on all that, how do we think about the needs of women and youth in terms of housing? I think that the Sustainable Development Goals help give us a window into how to rethink what we're doing. In Canada, we rely on a homelessness sector, which mostly involves emergency crisis services, shelters, soup kitchens, that kind of thing. And the responsibility in government for funding those usually lies with whatever ministry is responsible for housing. So we see homelessness as a housing problem, which it most certainly is, but it's not just a housing problem. And the SDGs point to this. If you look at this, and were to say, where does homelessness fit in here? It fits in a lot of these different social development goals. To address housing precarity and homelessness, we have to link different sustainable development goals. We can't just focus on that, that's focusing on better cities or housing. We have to talk about poverty. We have to talk about zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, decent work, reducing inequalities, etc. Because here's the thing, housing precarity and homelessness is a fusion policy issue. It can't sit in one ministry or department of government. It can't sit within one order of government. It's the Ministry of Health in Canada has to be at the table. The criminal justice system has to be, the education system has to be, child protection system has to be. All of these public systems have responsibilities for addressing homelessness, and many of them produce homelessness. For instance, in Canada, we discharge people from prison into homelessness, even though we know that, that their likelihood of reoffending will go through the roof if you do that. Right? Like, that's not crime reduction policy, that's crime production. Likewise, 0.3% of Canadian youth have some involvement in child protection unless they're homeless. Then it's 58%. That child protection system is a pipeline into homelessness. So we need systems responses, and we need to step back and not see this issue as just about housing. So I'm going to end off my part of this final thing to talk about what is the key problem here. So in addressing housing precarity and homelessness, many countries focus narrowly on one metric. Is the person housed or not? So if we can get someone housed, we throw the keys through the key slot and run away, we act as if the problem is solved. And I'm going to give you a short story here before I continue. So there was this Housing First program in a major city in Canada that was targeting and supporting female-led families. And it was a program that had a really strong reputation. It was like a model, this is what you do. Housing First is one of the very few interventions in the world of homelessness for which there is an evidence base. It's a good idea, right? You have housing without preconditions and you give people supports. And so this program was doing this for families led by mothers. The program got taken over by another organization, and it's like you lift up the rock and look under, and sometimes you don't like what you see. What they found was that 59% of the children in these families had child protection involvement. 34% of the young people, 34% of the young people in this program over 5 years wound up being apprehended. And a good number of young people in those situations wound up in youth homeless shelters. Right? So here's your ideal program model. Something's going terribly wrong. And here's what the problems are, right? The mothers aren't getting the right support. Many of these mothers are Indigenous, Many are marginalized otherwise. Many experience trauma, have not had any support in recovering from their trauma. Many of them are living in extreme poverty. In spite of being in the program, don't have enough food for the children. Many are exhausted and demoralized, and their children are being apprehended, which further traumatizes them. So you can see what's going on here. We are not applying the right kind of supports because we're satisfied that we just got the person housed. And we have to change our thinking about that. We have to move away from that housing is enough to focusing on well-being as the outcome. If we focus on well-being, on that person's mental health, on giving that person a break from their children, of helping them with their children, of building stronger families, of making sure there's enough food, of making sure young people get, and their parents, reasonable access to education and employment. That's what we should be aiming for if we're concerned about housing precarity and homelessness. And there's a recently released Geneva Charter for Well-Being, which builds on the Ottawa Charter on health promotion. I'm pausing, which is crazy because my first job was as a health promoter. I didn't know what that meant then either. But anyway, this is really a helpful document because it's showing again that what we have to put at the center of our work with people who are struggling, right? And not come up with simple solutions where we can check a box because the person is housed. And so we ask, what would an emphasis on well-being mean for how we respond to housing precarity and homelessness? What would change? We'd have to have that integrated systems response. Right? We'd have to focus on more. We'd have to let people recover and give them supports. We'd have to do things very differently. And the big piece of doing that would be changing the way we respond to crisis. In Canada, our response to homelessness, the bulk of the funding, as I mentioned before, and the intervention focuses on that emergency. We are getting better at getting people housed with supports, but obviously not that well, given the example I gave. We do almost nothing about prevention. And given what Melanie said about youth, when their prolonged exposure to homelessness, health declines, mental health declines, exposure to violence and criminal victimization, they're trafficked, they wind up using substances more to self-medicate, which, let me tell you, that's what I would do. I might do that later. Just kidding. So we have to switch to a model that looks more like this, like shift it around, focus more on prevention, on helping people before they fall into deep crisis and are mired. And that's going to be the responsibility, again, not just of the homelessness sector, but those public systems. And make sure people get the right housing and the right supports. So housing that's safe, adequate, and affordable, and appropriate. And build our model in terms of what we're measuring around a broader range of outcomes rather than just housing stability, right? We need to focus on health and well-being, education and employment, what other kind of supports do people need, engaging, strengthening families and natural support so that people don't have to rely on professional services.
And we will end by letting you know 3 near to medium-term projects we'll be doing as part of our UN Geneva Charter Center of Excellence with our partners at the UNECE. First of all, develop guidelines for preventing and responding to homelessness in UNECE member states. 2, monitor the progress of member state strategies to prevent and end homelessness where they exist. And 3, highlight best practices and cross-systems responses to preventing and ending homelessness in UNECE member states. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you, Melanie and Stefan, for the excellent explanation that you gave on how to prevent or how to address housing issue of women and young people. It's very inspiring what you said, that it needs an integrated system of integrated system approach. And I would like to say that it's easy saying, it's not that easy implementing. We in Albania, we have included this into the legislation. The problem is that there are policies that are designed at national level and not so much linkage, like health policies, for example, and services. And it's difficult to implement. However, we are concerned that housing is not a problem, or precarity of housing or lack of housing is not just a problem of housing, and we cannot address it only with housing policies and instruments, but it has to integrate health, education, training, and job employment and social services for mental health services as well. So thank you very much for this, and also for proposing the work within the Center of Excellence, which looks extremely interesting. Thank you very much, and I read now the decision that we take note on of the outcome of the panel discussion on promoting affordable housing and women and youth. Apologies for not having time for discussion with delegates, because I think we also include the proposals in the decisions that were just mentioned. So we take note also on the, but I don't think that they are written on the screen. So we have to write on the screen. Now, we have to do it now. Okay, so we come back to this topic for taking a decision to agree also on the program of work of Center of Excellence. And to save time, I'm going to the agenda item 10, matters arising since the last committee session. And I invite here Hannah to present. Hannah is the secretary of our committee, to present recent developments in the United Nations, including the high-level political forum and ECE, which affect the work of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So basically, I'm just going to go through some of the slides of activities that we have done. So if we go next, thank you. So first of all, there was this high-level political forum that took place in New York in April. You could see the date on the bottom. And that was where the UNECE Regional Commission was this year throughout 2022. It was organizing all the 5 regional commissions, and we had this panel discussion on the scaling up the implementation of the new urban agenda, and with 5 regional commissions participated, and we were able to have another report that would, a regional report to track the implementation of the new urban agenda, which offered regional perspective in addition to the global one by UN Habitat. Then, of course, there were these, this is our regional advisor, Gulnara, had done a lot when it comes to the Helsinki. The idea is that through these different fora and different activities, at one point one could reach out to broader audience on our work in the area of housing and Housing 2030. And at the same time, learn and see what other countries are doing and what are their needs. And of course, it's kind of mobilization and looking into further the collaboration through also projects. Of course, I want to say that all of these activities, some of them are financed from projects. I don't want to go point by point, but you could see what are the issues that were presented. Of course, then we was the Katowice, we're still in Finland, sorry. Again, you see that there was the annual conference that was another feature of this year in terms of our activities. There was a workshop on new social housing. As you can see, the promotion of the Housing 2030 is still something which is very much alive, although we're almost 2030, but there is a lot to be done under this initiative. this is Katowice, where there was a lot of activities by UNECE alone or through jointly with other partners, and of course including the UN. So there was a networking event, one UN event where we tried to highlight what us as UN as a family in doing in order to scale up the implementation of the new urban agenda. Then there were some focused thematic presentations, again innovative financing for cities, and here there were a lot of discussions about PPP or green finance, affordable, adequate and climate neutral housing, which is something which has a lot of dimensions, and here there was regional discussion as well. And then, of course, national urban policies, and the idea is to see how the urban policies could act as an interdisciplinary type of policy to scale up, again, the implementation of the new urban agenda. And, of course, all of these activities were in collaboration with our partners. So that's it from Matters Arising. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Any question with regard to the program? In case there is not any question or comment, then I read the following decision. The committee takes note of the information provided and make recommendations for the future work of the committee. B, takes note of the outcomes of ECE sessions, side events, and training events at, I read, 1, ECE 2022, Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, high-level, yeah. Second, high-level political forum to assess progress on the implementation of the new urban agenda organized by the President of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly that took place in New York, 28 April 2022. 3, H22 City Expo that took place in Helsingborg, 31st of May to 1st of June 2022. International Social Housing Festival in Helsinki from 14 to 17 June 2022. And 11th World Urban Forum, Transforming Our Cities for a Better Urban Future, that took place in Katowice, 26 to 30 June 2022. Do we have ready?
I discussed it with them. We'll do it as part of the Centers of Excellence.
Okay. Okay. So then we pass to the next item of the agenda, item 11, response to the COVID-19 pandemic at city level and building urban economic resilience. The documents, supporting documents under this agenda item are a number of them that you can see. Is EC/2021/3/5/inf.3, 4, 5, and 6. And I would like to inform you that the Building Urban Economic Resilience during and after COVID-19 project was implemented from 2020 to 2022 with the support of the United Nations Development Account. The project was implemented through collaboration between the 5 United Nations regional commissions and technical partners, the United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, and the United Nations Capital Development Fund. And I invite the regional advisor to Forests, Land and Housing Division, Ms. Gulnara Roll, to brief the committee about the project. Gulnara. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair. I would like to ask to open my presentation. So we will speak today about outcomes. We have to do it very, very close to the microphone. Is it better for? Yeah, good. Very good. During the COVID pandemic, at the very first months, we were approached by many cities asking what to do, because you remember yourself the situation when you were at the first months of pandemics, when lots of businesses closed and many countries and cities were really worried about economic health consequences as well as economic consequences. So this is when we at the UN agreed to develop a global project to support the most vulnerable cities, to develop kind of a model how to assess what will be the economic damage from the pandemic, but also other relevant crises, because, for instance, during pandemic, many cities were affected by different crises. So, for instance, the city of Tirana in Albania came into the pandemics after the strong earthquake. And one of the pilot cities in Ukraine, Kharkiv, at the end of pandemic was affected by the war, was distracted by the war. So this approach to the diagnostics of the economic damages and also developing the concrete recommendations how to address these problems, and also to develop measures and find funding. So this was a project about. I would like to explain a bit more about the approach. And then I'm very pleased to have Mr. Toktoson Sultanov from the Bishkek City Council, who went really very far with implementation of recommendations of this Building Economic Resilience Action Plan. So we'll be really very pleased to hear from Mr. Sultanov what Bishkek achieved through this cooperation. And I could say that I'm very proud and very pleased how much Bishkek actually managed to achieve. So next slide, please. So our project came actually from the very concrete facts that we see that actually pandemic affected mostly the cities. So 90% of the pandemic, people affected by pandemic were actually in the cities, in urban areas, because they're much more densely populated. Also, this is in cities where businesses were closed, and also economically cities were much more affected by the pandemic. So we developed this project with 16 cities, so we piloted this in 16 cities across the world. And the idea was really to assess the damages and also develop kind of planning to build more resilience. And resilience really to a much wider topics than just COVID, also looking at other vulnerabilities and other risks. This work was managed by us at UN Economic Commission for Europe, together with our sister commission, UN Economic Commission for Africa, who are located in Addis Ababa. And then we worked together with other sister regional commissions for Economic Commission for West Asia, for Asia Pacific, and Latin America and Caribbean. We also had two expert agencies, which is UN Habitat, and you heard from Graham just now. So it's very good, our very good partner organization, which has expertise in urban management, urban planning. And UN Capital Development Fund. UNCDF is actually kind of a bank, UN bank. Like, it's not the World Bank, which is outside of the UN, but UNCDF is really developing investment projects for the cities. So we had basically 5 regional commissions like UNECE. So we had our colleagues in Beirut for Arab states. So we had our colleagues for Latin America in Santiago de Chile, or Addis Ababa, or in Bangkok. So we actually were meeting every week, to keep updated. So you can imagine through the 2 years, we really became like a family, thanks to that project. And we established really a very good cooperation and exchange of information between these 16 cities. And this is a list of 16 cities. I mean, to preserve time, I will not repeat all the names of the 16 cities. So most of them, as you see, outside of the UNECE region. But in the UNECE region, it is Tirana, Albania, Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and Kharkiv, Ukraine. So today you hear from Bishkek, and tomorrow you will hear about outcomes in the Kharkiv city. Tirana wasn't able to come, but of course information is available, the report is available online, and we also have actually video, video presentation also with the Vice Mayor. So what we did, we developed methodology for diagnostics. So basically we collected data about each city, about the economic and social situation. We developed kind of regional brief, like regional analysis, what is the situation is at the regional level. Then, based on the diagnostic and this kind of evidence-based, we developed recovery plans with very concrete recommendations. Let's say what the city needs to do in order to overcome, ideally overcome the consequences of pandemic and other risks. And then, of course, we made sure that the cities communicate to each other and learn from each other, get best practices. And also now established an e-learning course, which is now available in English, but also now we'll be launching the version in Russian as well, because we work quite a lot. Bishkek is in Central Asia, so we have many more cities in Central Asia and Caucasus for whom also in Russian these e-learning materials are useful. And of course, the plan is also to do it in other languages, like in Spanish and other languages in the future. So speaking about the diagnostic, this is the approach. So we looked into the local businesses environment, because this is SMEs who suffered the first from the pandemic. So they lost the job the first. We looked at the local labor markets, local financial system, economic governance, and basic service infrastructure. All this methodology is available on the web page of the project, so you can actually get all the information about the methodology. It's open source. So this is a bit more of the details about what we looked in terms of the indicators. And then when we received data against the indicators, then it was kind of a programmed environment, and then we did a benchmarking, so looked at the performance of the city. So this is just an example, for instance, how did it work? So like red is something which needed development, or green where the city actually has capacity to deal with this, let's say local economy diversity, so the city is not monofunctional, so city has different sources of income. So this is kind of an example of how this analysis was done. And this is the structure of how we were doing. So we went through diagnostic to planning. We did the workshops with the city government. We developed vision for economic recovery. And then we got in touch also with the financial institutions. So these three reports, the three resilience building plans are on the webpage of this event, so you can read them. But what is, I think, important about this action plan, that they really serve as a finance mobilization plan. Just to look what kind of budget funds are available, what kind of financing can be requested from the international financial institutions, and also to bring together the different stakeholders, because of course participation of like NGOs and private business and academia is important. And Bishkek is, as Dr. Son will be speaking, academia played in Bishkek a very big role. Like the local university conducted hundreds of interviews of local community members. So this was all reflected in the action plan, but also in the project concept note for recovery of the informal settlements. Actually, in Bishkek, the issue of the informal settlements was not addressed for about 20 years, and thanks to this project, we actually managed to get to it, and eventually now, there is also support to improvement of the 5 informal settlements in Bishkek. So this is again part of the planning, diagnostics and analysis of the performance. So what were our, as we had all the local and regional meetings, what were our main lessons? Of course, that capacity of cities is very, very different. It really depends on the context. So different cities also require different levels of assistance. Actually, as we today also spoke with some of the colleagues here, that you really need to have international experts who knows the city, who knows the region. And this is why, we know that UNECE is really well suited to work in the region, because we know the region, we know the specifics, so we are able to connect to the local experts, because the risk is always, if you bring an international consultant to the city who does not know the region, and provide solution which doesn't fit the local environment, it's always results in not sustainable outcomes of this kind of action plan or master plan. Importance of coordination. So one of the topics that was recommended, for instance, Bishkek, again, you will hear about it, establishment of the Innovation Center, which would be kind of a coordinator between different departments within city governments. And this is very important, because this is what we see again and again, that when you have these very complex issues which require intersectoral cooperation, this coordination is not always there. And Bishkek did really great in establishing the center, in establishing really this cross-sectoral cooperation. And of course, community engagement. Community engagement is very, as you know, very important, but COVID pandemic showed that when people were at home, then there were less opportunity for the engagement, and we see that much more efforts need to be done in order to engage the communities. Financing, of course, is a big issue, and this was also focus of this project. We are planning to develop actually a follow-up project and focusing actually on the financial part. We developed some of the instruments already on innovative financing, so this is definitely will be a priority for the future. And the evidence base. So the project also showed that there is lack of data, and the cities really need to collect the data on a regular basis. And I think that for our future cooperation with the cities, this will be definitely a priority. So with that, I'm very glad to give back to the chair the floor.
Thank you, Gulnara. It was very interesting, the presentation on the tools that you have developed to assess the, not only to assess, but also to give to cities a tool for developing recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. And what is important, I think, is not just to have this action plan, but also to make it implementable, and this is what you highlighted. So now I give the floor to Mr. Tokston Sultanov, Deputy Chairman of Bishkek.
Good evening, Madam Chair, distinguished guests to the session of the committee. First of all, I'm extremely glad to welcome you all wholeheartedly and thank you to the organizers. On behalf of our organization, mainly of Bishkek City Council, for us it is a great pleasure to be here in San Marino. I'm glad to talk to you and talk about our urban development policy in the city of Bishkek. On a whole, Madam Gulnara has already talked about general overview. However, I would like to talk to you about specific measurements we have taken in our city of Bishkek. First of all, the issue of the pandemic has affected all the countries throughout the world. And I must say that the situation was not clear, because at the very beginning, cities that did not face such pandemics before, of course, this crisis was unprecedented and it was quite challenging at the very beginning. However, I hope that all the action we took during the pandemic and all the lessons we learned will help us in the future. In 2020, since the outbreak of an emergency situation in the city of Bishkek and after the release of a number of regulatory documents by the government of the Kyrgyz Republic on the restriction of economic activity, as well as after introducing a state of emergency in the city of Bishkek, the businesses, industries, services and constructions have stopped and were suspended. The servicing sector found itself in the most vulnerable position. Markets, shopping malls, hairdressers, restaurants, catering businesses were temporarily closed, as well as ban on holding mass events, including celebrations in restaurants, was introduced, as well as cargo and truck transportation services were suspended. All this had an adverse impact on the socio-economic situation in the city of Bishkek. As at the end of 2020, the growth rate of GRP decreased by 8.8%. It should be noted that on a national scale, Bishkek amounts and provides for 40% of the national GDP. There are three main sectors: trade and services, construction and industry. At the end of 2020, the volume of manufactured industrial goods compared to 2019 decreased by 5%. And in 2020, the volume of market services compared to 2019 decreased by 14%, roughly 14%. The volume of gross construction output in 2020 compared to 2019 decreased by 9.6%. All of the above-mentioned factors had a significant adverse impact on the economic performance of the capital city, which in its turn affected the local budget revenue. At the end of 2020, the actual volume of taxes and fees collected by the budgets of the city of Bishkek amounted to 8.9 billion soms. So, should be noted that the extreme demand for food was registered after the emergency situation and emergency state were announced. It led to a sharp increase in prices, especially for essential goods. So what measures have been taken to solve all these issues? In order to minimize the adverse COVID-19 related impact and to ensure social and economic stability, in the city Bishkek, the operational city headquarters was established and the action plan was developed in order to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. In order to solve the problems of businesses, an online chat with representatives of businesses was launched. This chat became a platform where support measures, potential support measures for recovery were discussed. Given the situation, in order to support people, local government agency, together with the representatives of businesses and various funds, humanitarian aid through sets of essential products was provided. In order to take prompt measures to prevent artificial overpricing of essential goods, since March 2020, activities have been carried out on a regular basis in order to coordinate and monitor prices on the marketplace and in the shopping malls of Bishkek. Furthermore, task forces have been set up to respond to unjustified increase in prices of food, consumer goods and medicines. Furthermore, targeted measures were taken in cooperation with the owners of supermarkets, markets, mini-markets and representatives of pharmaceutical companies in order to maintain a reasonable price limit. To monitor the health status of citizens who were on a lockdown or quarantine at home, 40 mobile groups were operational 24/7. In order to assist the population in obtaining access to cash withdrawal, payout of pensions, allowances, wages, The work of mobile cash desks of commercial banks was organized jointly with the National Bank of the Kyrgyz Republic. Furthermore, I would like to say that volunteers and common citizens of the Bishkek city have contributed largely. Since 2021, there has been a gradual recovery of the Bishkek economy. Thus, the volume of manufactured industrial products amounted to 45.8 billion, so increased by almost 40% compared to 2020. The volume of market services was 27.4% higher than in 2020. And the volume of gross construction output increased by 2.9%. The occurred events related to a number of pandemic-related restrictions drew attention to the most vulnerable areas. In order to support the socio-economic stability and development of the city of Bishkek, we did the following. The first, we decided to create a development fund to boost entrepreneurship. Secondly, reduce the level of shadow underground economy. Thirdly, implement modern information technologies and systems for efficient management of the resources of the city. And finally, implement environmental projects. First, establishment of the development fund. In order to boost the development of entrepreneurship, create new jobs, implement innovative and investment projects, as well as to create favorable beneficial conditions and attract investment, to promote the growth of business, investment, and implement social products. Reducing the level of underground economy. To create equal and fair conditions for entrepreneurship, the stability of the city economy, we prepared recommendations in order to reduce the level of the shadow economy. Key and relevant factor contributing to stability and development of the city management through the implementation of ICT technologies, systems that will create an efficient, mobile, quick-to-operate system and provide the population with a timely and high-quality access to municipal services. The city of Bishkek is actively working on implementing of environmental projects. In 2022, the city of Bishkek officially launched a project to develop a green city plan under the Green Cities program of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which our municipality joined back in 2019. In addition, the municipality, in order to solve key environmental issues, is considering attracting investments for the implementation of the following projects: increasing the number of green areas and improving the delivery of irrigation water to green spaces through the construction and revamping of irrigation networks, drilling of wells and installation of irrigation water pipelines, which will increase the coverage of irrigated green spaces in the number of irrigated green areas. Modernization and reconstruction of the city's treatment facilities aimed at achieving sanitation and hygiene standards and environmental safety. Furthermore, as Madam Gulnara has already mentioned, I would like to talk about a project which was implemented in cooperation with the UNECE. This project is aimed at dealing with informal settlements and economic resilience. So I would like to give you some figures about Bishkek. Bishkek is a city which is located in Central Asia. It is the capital city of Kyrgyzstan. For the time being, Bishkek is a city of republican significance, and it is the largest city in Kyrgyzstan. It is as well a modern cultural, political, and economic center of our republic. Our city is the largest in terms of population, more than 1 million people. For the time being, there are 4 administrative neighborhoods, or rayons, as we call them, 4 districts, and we have 45 deputies. Compared to 2020, this year, Bishkek City has set an ambitious goal to increase our budget by 4 billion. And now we have already allocated a budget of 15 billion soms, so about 190 billion US dollars. The main sectors of our economy, we are carrying out a lot of meetings in order to study projects for future UNECE cooperation with the city of Bishkek in order to achieve SDGs. And these meetings were held back in February. In 2021 and 2020, there were meetings by architects in 5 pilot informal settlements, and final reports were prepared. Furthermore, I would like to add that today there are 47 informal settlements in the city of Bishkek, among which in 5 settlements, UNECE is working together with our municipality. So on July 5th, 2021, the UNECE invited the Development Initiative for Asian Cities to assist the preparation of sustainable infrastructure projects, linking them with funding, strengthening and building their capacity to develop and implement high-priority investments. The UNECE acts as a coordinating committee for the promotion of Bishkek's economic sustainability and resilience projects. For the time being, there is a project which is underway in order to develop 5 informal settlements in the city of Bishkek, which I am naming right now. As of today, an agreement has been signed in order to prepare a feasibility study and to upgrade and modernize 5 pilot informal settlements between the Council City of Bishkek, SDI, and another stakeholder. So we are talking about $500,000 US, and it was supported from the environmental program. This initiative was endorsed by the Development Initiative of Asian Cities, as well as by the head of the Bank of Development. And it was endorsed until the 2026 and is coordinated by the Parliament of the Bishkek city. This project is aimed at modernizing of 5 informal settlements, comprehensive development of informal settlements. 75,000 people will benefit from this project directly. Implementation of this project will help to promote sustainable development for other informal settlements. An inclusive and comprehensive approach will be implemented to ensure access for vulnerable groups and to provide support. We need comprehensive access to drainage as well as to sewerage, solid waste disposal, roads, green spaces, public facilities, including education. It includes the development of 5 industrial regional hubs in 5 pilot settlements. The aim is to create jobs and to develop the economy of these 5 informal settlements, which are pilot. Thank you so much for your attention.
Mr. Sultanov, thank you very much for informing us on the measures that you have taken to address the impact of COVID-19, in particular on the informal settlements. And this is, I would say that you have shown us, sorry, yeah, thank you for sharing with us your experience in addressing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in general, but in particular on informal settlements, inhabitants. And I think that, well, you have given also short-term, medium, and long-term measures that you are taking, which I would say that they go along with also with SDG 11, as it addresses informal settlements. Now, do we have, Gulara, do we have the video now, or from Deputy Mayor of Tirana?
No, I understand we... We're not showing it, right?
Okay, so if we don't
we'll
show...
make it available online.
Ah, okay. So then, in that case, we have closed the session for today. We will continue tomorrow with the continuation of this agenda item on impacts of COVID-19 and the project on response to COVID-19 pandemic. We heard a lot this afternoon, in particular, about emergencies and the need to prepare and so as to prevent emergencies, and I would include in emergencies also homelessness in general, and in particular for women and youth. Now at the end, so thank you very much at the end. Thank you very much to everyone that you had the patience and the interest to follow the whole session of today from the morning till the end. And see you tomorrow. But before closing, I'd like to inform that there is a side event that takes place between 6:30 and 8 o'clock. And it is about presentation of sustainable country profile and master plan of the Republic of San Marino. And the location is? It's here in this room. So you are all invited to attend. And thank you very much for today. And see you tomorrow.